Adam Curry, John C. Dvorak.
It's Thursday, April 8th, 2021. This is your award-winning Gimbo Nation Media Assassination episode 1336.
This is No Agenda.
Ghosted y'all and broadcasting almost live from Opportunity Zone 33 here in the frontier of Austin, Texas, capital of the Drone Star State. In the morning, everybody. I'm Adam Curry.
And from northern Silicon Valley, where it's business as usual for everyone around here, I'm John C. Dvorak.
It's Crackpot and Buzzkill in the morning.
Past the pina colada.
Live to tape.
This is our first vacation in, I think it's 15 months. Because we had Christmas.
Do we take any time off during Christmas? I don't think so.
So it's even longer than that. We didn't take any time off. We haven't taken a single show off for maybe longer. Look, I don't want to complain or anything, but
no, I mean we can do it, but it's like I don't remember taking Thanksgiving or Christmas off. We usually, and I think we bragged about working because they were offbeat days. They weren't like Christmas landed on a Sunday or anything.
You're right. Well, typically whenever I'm traveling or even on vacations or my honeymoon, we've still done the show.
Yes.
About that. Yeah, we really needed a little break just to unplug. And at my request, a rare, never done before 2 shows. I don't think we've I don't think we've ever done 2 shows in a row that we haven't been here.
Maybe not.
So all we're doing is just praying Joe Biden stays alive until we come back.
Even if he doesn't, I mean, it would just be pent-up demand for us to come back. We don't have to jump back and do some emergency show.
Everyone's on we need an emergency broadcast. Quick, Adam and John, help us. We don't know what to do.
We had a bunch. Remember that happened to us a couple of times in the past?
Yeah, several times.
Why don't you do a show? Do a show because they just did this, and you can't wait a couple of days for us to actually organize information.
No.
What's the rush?
Because that's what everyone does now. We jump on it and we just talk some crap. And this is an outrage. Stephen Crowder got deplatformed. Blah, 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 blah. That's all I hear all day. Hey, so you worked hard on this.
This put together than doing a show.
I bet it did. So this is how long is this special?
It's a little over 2 hours.
Wow.
And it's all clips. It's a clip show, a real clip show.
So it doesn't include us at all.
No, at first I was going to include some of our commentary because there's a lot of good stuff that we say. Mm-hmm. But then as it developed, especially in the first half, which you'll hear, or right after this, it just sang by itself. It was a soloist. I didn't really need to put us in it because it told a story, just clip, clip, clip. And so I didn't even try to find anything for us after the first hour. I said, well, this is working too well. I don't need to put us in there.
Now, I'm curious how you made it.
It's extremely entertaining.
I'm curious how you made it because I know that I gave you my date database, which is date organized, year, month, day, a year, month show.
Yeah.
So how did you go in chronological order? What did you do?
No. It actually is kind of in chronological order, but what I did is I used that search engine you like so much.
The everything search engine.
Is it everything? Yeah. It's quite good. And so I searched on the big database, including the stuff I have, the more recent stuff, and using everything, and it all cropped up. And I had like almost the first, I think it was the first hour or more than an hour is just the word global warming.
I was going to say you just searched for global warming and you got that. Oh, I'll bet.
Then I did change gears and got another hour or more out of climate change.
Did you try Green New Deal?
I think I did a couple of searches on 2 things. I think Green New Deal, but it wasn't as productive, believe me.
Interesting.
And coral. I need to get the clip in there from the coral expert that says that the barrier reef is not a mess at all.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, they turned on some underwater speakers and everything grew back. I heard that on a podcast somewhere. I'm like, oh, that makes total sense. So it didn't all die. It just needed some rock and roll.
Not only didn't die, it's just thriving, according to the expert, the #1 world expert on the Great Barrier Reef. But anyway, there's other stuff in there. There's a lot of, it's just fun to listen to because there's so much contradictory information. And you can tell there's 2 things you'll notice. One is that the warmists, as we'll call them, all sound nuts and hysterical.
Okay, yeah, nothing new there. We know
and
that.
the people that say, well, that's not true because everyone else sounds normal. The people who are saying, well, that's questionable and, that needs to be looked into and this isn't true, this is a lie. They all sound normal and the other people sound hysterical. And it's just like, after 2 hours of listening to this, you realize that one side's a little more probably on the ball than the other. I think it well, I don't know. We'll see what
How far back does this go? Does this go back, 10 years?
It goes back to the first clips that we had.
Wow.
Yeah, it goes back a long way.
Oh, no, I love it. I love it.
I don't know if it's 10 years, but it goes way back. I think at least 9.
Well, I'm very excited.
Well, good. Well, let's start it off.
Scientists have reported 2015 was the hottest year on record by far. The experts pinned the record-breaking heat on long-term global warming caused by the emission of greenhouse gases. 2015's record breaks the previous record set the year before in 2014. In response to the findings, Gerald Meal, a scientist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, said, quote, "The whole system is warming up relentlessly."
Wait, maybe it's me. I don't know. And climate change scientists are taking their global warming threats to a whole new level, outer space. Researchers at Penn State actually laid out a number of scenarios as to why aliens may someday attack Earth. And one of them is because humans are spewing way too much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. They speculate that extraterrestrials may be so angered by greenhouse gases they could, quote, kill us, enslave us, or potentially eat us. Both Al Gore and Joe Paterno have remained silent on these new theories, though I wonder if the faculty and students there at Penn State ever looked into the works of Edmund North.
It was reported today that this weekend, for the first time in human history, we have reached atmospheric levels of carbon at 415 parts per million. This has never been seen in recorded human history. In fact, meteorologist Eric Holthus and journalists said simply about this measurement and development, we do not know a planet like this. The last time our planet hit 415 was in the Pliocene period. Oceans were 90 feet higher. Bacteria and diseases we have never seen before roamed the earth.
Across the globe, the weather picture is one of fire and ice, bone-numbing record cold in the Midwest, fire and record heat in Australia, 120 degrees and hotter this month.
What that really means is that fires will be uncontrollable, they'll be fast-moving.
And yo-yo weather cycles. After the deep freeze in the U.S., a 50-degree rebound in some cities within days. Hard to believe when you're frozen like an icicle, but experts say that Arctic blast is, in fact, further evidence of climate change. In response to President Trump's skepticism, the weather experts at NOAA tweeting, "Winter storms don't prove that global warming isn't happening. Here's why." At the North Pole, scientists say the melting sea ice and ocean temperatures have caused the walls of the jet stream, or polar vortex, to break open like a dam in places. That has allowed Arctic air to escape, rushing south into the Midwest.
Not only is greenhouse gas warming impacting the planet, but it's really beginning to kick in, and it's kicking in the parts of the planet that are most sensitive, in particular Arctic sea ice regions and the Arctic.
So let's leave them something to think about as they go home. Let them go home and say, Mr. Soros said, here are 3 things we can do, simply. 1,
work on a better world order where we work together to resolve problems that confront humanity, like global warming. And I think that dealing with global warming will require a lot of investment. You see, for the last 25 years, the world economy, the motor of the world economy that has been driving it was consumption by the American consumer, who has been spending more than he's been saving. All right, and he's been producing. So that motor is now switched off. It's finished. It's run out of. It can't continue. You need a new motor, and we have a big problem. Global warming requires big investment And that could be the motor of the world economy in the years to come.
Putting more money in, building infrastructure, converting to green technology?
Instead of consuming, building electricity grid, saving on energy, rewiring the houses, adjusting your lifestyle, where energy is got to cost more until you introduce those new things. So it will be painful, but at least we will survive and not cook.
And there was a Gallup poll in this country a few weeks ago that said despite rising temperatures and all of this strange weather we've been having, the percentage of Americans who care a great deal about global warming has been dropping from 41% 6 years ago to 34% today. What is it about human nature that wants to believe the worst can't happen?
I don't know. I don't know.
Well, this was also the day that government scientists said 14 of the last extreme weather events were made worse by climate change caused by pollution. Examples cited included the 2014 California wildfires and cyclones in Hawaii.
The study found that in 2014, extreme heat waves like the one that gripped South Korea were made worse by human-caused climate change. Things such as car emissions, burning coal and methane gas. The report studied 28 extreme weather events around the world last year. 14 of those, including devastating floods in Australia and New Zealand, were found to be made worse in part by climate change. But the impact of human activity can be complex, the report says. This is the fourth year scientists have studied whether human activity is at least partially to blame for extreme weather things such as droughts and wildfires. And over those years, Scott, more than half of the extreme weather events they've studied have been linked to human-caused climate change.
I don't see people trying to repeal the law of gravity just because they're gaining weight. Right. I didn't see people trying to repeal E equals MC squared because it somehow conflicted with their political philosophies. These are emergent scientific truths. So I'm disappointed when I look around and I see people cherry-picking the consensus of observation and experiment that has emerged in science. That is the anatomy of a scientific truth. By the way, there are always some results that dangle and linger, but the emergent scientific truth is when multiple research investigations by different people who would typically be in competition with one another, from different branches of science.
Right, who have an incentive not to confirm.
Oh,
right? That's a very important point.
Oh, yeah,
because the idea behind the whole, bizarre crypto conspiracy theory about global warming is that somehow everyone's, working in concert, when in fact everyone individually is the opposite.
Well, let me ask you one other thing, just to get to the nitty-gritty. Do you believe that it's been proven that CO2 is the primary control knob for climate? Do you believe that?
No, I think that measuring with precision human activity on the climate is something very challenging to do, and there's tremendous disagreement about the degree of impact. So no, I would not agree that it's a primary contributor to the global warming that we see.
Okay. All right.
But we don't know that yet. As far as we need to continue the debate and continue the review and the analysis.
I agree. When I hear the science is settled, it's like I never heard that science actually gotten to a point where it was. That's the whole point of science, is that you keep asking questions, but I don't want to be called a denier. So, it scares me. It's a terrible thing to be called. Anyway, Administrator Pruitt, I know you don't want to be called that either. Thanks for being with us this morning. I appreciate it.
Well, we want to bring in our science guy, Bill Nye, and, talk about something else that's falling from the sky. And that is an asteroid. What's coming our way? Is this an effect of perhaps global warming, or is this just some meteoric occasion?
I resent you calling me a denier. That is a word meant to put me down. I'm a skeptic about climate change. And I want to make it darn clear, Mr. Kenny's not a scientist. I am. He's the CEO of the Weather Channel now. I was the founder of the Weather Channel, not the co-founder.
And I'm glad you did, because I am addicted to the Weather Channel. I watch a lot of cable news.
Now, hold on just a minute. I'm not done. And CNN has taken a very strong position on global warming that it is a consensus. Well, there is no consensus in science. Science isn't a vote. Science is about facts. And if you get down to the hard, cold facts, there's no question about it. climate change is not happening. There is no significant man-made global warming now. There hasn't been any in the past, and there's no reason to expect any in the future. There's a whole lot of baloney, and yes, it has become a big political point of the Democratic Party and part of their platform, and I regret it's become political instead of scientific, but the science is on my side.
I don't think we're going to come to a conclusion about the topic right here. What I do wonder, though, is when you see...
because you wouldn't allow it to happen on CNN, but I'm happy that I got on the air and got a chance to talk to your viewers. Hello, everybody. There is no global warming.
What I do wonder is when you see the government, when you see NASA, when you see other institutions say that 97% of climate scientists agree, do you think they're making it up? What I don't understand is how you square that.
That's a manipulated figure, and let me explain it to you. The government puts out about $2.5 billion directly for climate research every year. It only gives that money to scientists who will produce scientific results that support the global warming hypothesis of the Democrat Party position. So they don't have any choice. If you're going to get the money, you got to support their position. Therefore, 97% of the scientific reports published support global warming. Why? Because those are the ones the government pays for, and that's where the money is. It's real simple, but that doesn't mean it's right. That doesn't make it true. That only makes it bought and paid for. The money goes in circles.
About myself.
I liked it, actually.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm trying to do another one. And I'm actually, I mean, it sounds perverse to many people, but I'm proud of having done the book about global warming.
I mean, if you listen to this conversation, you have to be
thinking. I knew everybody was going to be against me, and I thought, this is what I believe, and I'm sorry. And I said it. And I did it, and I've taken just flack for it. But you know what? It is what I believe. And
you're proud that you did it because of you went into rough seas.
Very rough seas. And nasty and personal and brutal and unfair and mean.
Well, what was nasty, brutal, unfair, and mean?
Oh, Charlie, this is, I mean, you want to look at what people say. For example, when I started talking about genetics, people said, well, you know, you might get some criticism for this. Well, I haven't gotten any criticism for genetics, let me tell you. I mean, you know, I know what criticism is. But I've had the experience of having had books in print for 40 years. So I can go back and look at the stand that I took in favor of abortion when I was a medical student in Boston in 1967, 6 years before Roe v. Wade, and I can look at that and go, was I right or not? And I think, damn it, I was right. And I'm imagining when I wrote this book, when I wrote the State of Fear, I was imagining what's it going to look like in 40 years. I think I'm going to come out just fine.
And so what does this have to do with the global warming argument?
No, because global warming is an anomaly based on hyped up by this generation for something to bitch about. We've had it. We had it 55,000 years ago. We had it 300,000 years ago. But to blame it on us is bullshit.
Isn't it not accelerated by humans and carbon emissions?
100 millionth of a percent. Okay. Who cares?
So this is just a scam and a sham and all.
I'm jealous of Vice President, what's his face?
Gore.
So I think the key thing that we need to get out there is that there's a lot of things about climate change we still don't know. We spent a lot of time in the last 15, 20 years focusing on the extinction of big charismatic wildlife, and we've thought a little bit about how that might impact their parasites. But the direct impacts of climate change on parasites haven't been as well studied. So our research comes out and sort of does this global survey and really thinks through, okay, how good or bad could climate change be for parasites? And it turns out that parasites follow the same logic most species do. A handful do a little bit better in a changing climate, and the vast majority actually do a lot worse. They lose a lot of habitat, they lose their hosts, they face very high extinction rates. So I think one of the really cool things about parasites is that we have undervalued them for decades, and that means that when it turns out they actually serve important roles in ecosystems, it's all the more surprising. Parasites are a huge part of what holds ecosystems together. They can be the majority of biomass in an ecosystem. They can be 80% of the links in a food web. They control wildlife populations. They keep populations down, just like predators do. And just like predators in the 18th and 19th century when we were eradicating them, parasites are obviously a hard sell. But it turns out they play this important regulatory role. And what we think could happen in a changing climate is with these very high extinction rates, the loss of that stabilizing role could produce opportunities for new patterns of wildlife and human disease that are genuinely concerning.
So what he did was he took the modern instrumental temperature record and grafted it on to the end of the tree ring record.
It sounds like you're saying he cherry-picked a particular tree sample that gave him the data that he wanted for the early part of the record and then used the latest temperature data, grafted on to create this huge spike.
The blade, yeah. And of course the thing is, when you look at that blade, that sudden upturn in temperature that he has as the blade of his hockey stick, it's the accuracy of it is plus or minus 33%.
Okay, so how did this become the iconic graph that everybody referred to and that has driven so much of the climate discussion?
Because these people were being paid and worked at the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and that their goal was to show that humans were causing global warming and climate change, and therefore they created the data that justified that. And of course the hockey stick showed, until these humans and their industry appeared in the 1880s, the temperature was going down slightly and was almost level. And then, suddenly, there it is. That's proof that humans are the cause. That's the whole objective of everything they've done.
A Dutch court ruled today that the Netherlands must cut greenhouse gas emissions. The climate ruling ordered reductions of at least 25% below 1990 levels by 2020. Environmental activists said the case lays the legal groundwork for similar action in other countries.
The White House defended the president today against a world of opposition to his decision to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord. The deal, signed by nearly 200 countries, commits them to voluntarily reduce pollution linked to global warming. The president's chief defender heads the agency whose mission is in its title, environmental protection. Chip Reed begins our coverage.
The president made a very courageous decision yesterday in behalf of America.
EPA Chief Scott Pruitt, a leading voice in convincing President Trump to get out of the Paris Climate Accord, today defended him against worldwide condemnation.
We have nothing to be apologetic about as a country.
Other top White House officials hit the airwaves, making clear the president was focused not on the environment, but on jobs.
We're putting the American worker, the American economy first.
Because he promised to protect American jobs, American interests, American workers.
It's a position that appears to have limited political downside. A CBS News poll found that when asked what is the single most important problem for the government this year, 13% volunteered that it's the economy and jobs. Just 2% said the environment and global warming.
Well, the Chipotle restaurant chain is warning its investors about the risks of global warming. In its annual report, the company says climate change might eventually affect the availability of key ingredients such as avocados. It cited a Livermore National Lab prediction that hotter temperatures will cause a 40% drop in California's avocado production over the next 3 decades. The company says that issue could eventually drive up prices and force it to take items such as guacamole off the menu.
The International Energy Agency is predicting global greenhouse gas emissions will drop a record 8% this year as air travel, vehicular traffic, and oil use has plummeted across much of the globe due to the coronavirus pandemic. But the IEA warns emissions may soar again unless governments invest now in clean energy. This comes as a new study by NASA finds that 5,000 gigatons of ice have melted in Greenland and Antarctica over the last 16 years, producing enough water to fill Lake Michigan.
Chew on this before it's gone. In news that's not so sweet, Business Insider reports there's a chocolate shortage, and experts say it's on track to vanish by 2050. What on earth can we do about it? Call Mars, the candy company, that is. Mars Incorporated is working with scientists at the University of California, Berkeley to develop cacao plants that won't wilt. In the simplest of terms, warmer temps and drier conditions are killing cacao plants. Thankfully, brainiacs at UC Berkeley developed gene editing technology that lets scientists and the candy company tweak the crop's DNA. This is important because over half of the world's chocolate now comes from 2 countries in West Africa, according to the International Business Times. But in a few decades, these areas won't be suitable for the plants. If all goes well, instead of relocating them uphill in an area preserved for wildlife, the plants won't rot or wilt where they are, and we get to enjoy more chocolate. So thank you, UC Berkeley, Mars, and the gene editing tool. You could call them the 3 Musketeers. See what I did there?
Millions of people have taken part in protests as part of global action against climate change. Demonstrations have been held in around 150 countries as calls grow for governments to take a stronger lead in tackling the crisis. Now I'm joined by Sky's climate change correspondent, Hannah Thomas-Peter, who's in New York, where a UN summit on global warming will be held on Monday. Hannah, what has prompted this worldwide day of action?
Well, it's been organised, or shall we say inspired, by Fridays for Future, which was really started by Greta Thunberg, a young girl from Stockholm who's become a kind of global icon, a person who represents the voices of millions and millions of school children who followed her example and started striking from school on Fridays. Now, every few months or so, there is a global school strike, and those school strikes have been growing. This is potentially the largest one to date. We've got 150 different countries involved, 2,500 separate strikes across the world. We're looking at potentially millions of people on the streets today in what could be one of the largest climate protests in history. And the idea is, at this point, for it not to be just school children demanding action and change on a defining issue of our time, but to get adults to join and stand beside them.
A new study shows the number of people who could be displaced by sea level rise this century due to global warming is much higher than previously thought, with more than 13 million people at risk, nearly half of them in Florida. Those numbers are about 3 times higher than previous estimates for displacement. Deepak Mishra elaborated on the findings.
I think, there are certain layered approach that can be that can stem from this research.
This is Jim Hansen. Now, Jim Hansen, by the way, if you go back, in 1988, he was asked by a reporter, how do you see things in 40 years? And he says, well, you see the highway down there, the West Side Highway outside of his office? It's not going to be there anymore. Based on a doubling of CO2 from pre-industrial times. Well, right now we've gone 25 years into that 40 years. We've had 1 inch of sea level rise. There are 10 feet to go for him to make his prediction, and it's got to happen within the next 15 years. You take a look at the, let's see. This is Jim Hansen's slide, where he decided, realizing that sea level was not rising, he said it's really going to be exponential. So by the mid-century, it really isn't going to rise at all. You won't even be alive here, neither will I. And yet we're going to get 4 meters of rise. Now, this is meters, not feet, in the last 20 years of the century. Don't hold your breath on this one either.
That's right, Judy. It was the hottest June on record, going back 139 years, according to NASA. And today, halfway into July, the National Weather Service forecasts potentially deadly temperatures throughout this weekend across much of the United States. This week, a study by the Union of Concerned Scientists warned that the number of extreme heat days could more than double by mid-century, just 30 years away, if we don't change how much of those heat-trapping gases we emit. For more on where we are and where we might be going, I'm joined by Astrid Caldas. She's a senior climate scientist at the Union of Concerned Scientists. Welcome.
Thank you.
The skeptics are going to say, look, it's summertime. Of course it's hot. What can you say? What does the science say about this particular kind of a heat wave over this much of the U.S. and how it relates to climate change?
Well, this particular heat wave is due to a meteorological phenomenon that happens in the atmosphere. So this can happen independently of climate change. However, this heat dome that's leading to this heat wave is trapping warmer air because, as we know, the last 18 years, all the years in this century have been record-breaking years in terms of warming. So the thermometer is going up, temperatures are going up, so the heat waves are likely going up also.
When our ocean level rises?
Thank you for asking that question. I have the answer.
No, let me finish.
I have the answer.
Let me finish.
Thank you for the question. Yeah. Okay.
For the first time on Earth, we're changing the gas.
Now you're full of shit. Sit down. I'm going to answer you. I'm going to just shut up and sit down.
No way.
Sit down.
No, I got to finish my question.
I'm going to answer global warming.
All right, finish the question, then answer.
It's changing on Earth, and it's changing to CO2. What do you people with the money, what are you doing about this? Because
I'm going to tell you right now.
No, I've got children. I've got 21, 23-year-old children. And what's their future with you people with money? You talk about money all of the time.
Okay. Sit down, please. Sit down, please. In the front row. Excuse me. In the front row. Please sit down. Okay, you've asked your question. Thank you very much.
Okay. In 2011, my wife and I were in Antarctica, renewing our vows. For most of you that don't know, Antarctica's on a mountaintop. And there is a $500 million facility, scientific facility there. And the scientists came to give us presentations about global warming. And they had cores of ice that they had drilled. They had drilled 4,000 or 5,000 cores, and they only brought 15 or 20. So they're going through the second or third core, and they said 275,000 years ago, this was the temperature, blah, 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 blah. And then 55,000 years ago, the world was 2 degrees warmer Celsius than it is today. This is 2011. And he said, and I said, well, you mean the whole world? He says, yes. And the poles are only benchmarks. And I said, well, what about the things the young woman alluded to? Okay. And he said, it's all cyclical. And although the gas may have exacerbated it, in the cosmos of time, it's not a fart in the wind. In the cosmos of time, of the 13.8 billion years that we've been on this miserable planet, it's not a fart in the wind. Now, my direct answer to your question, if that were really true, which you believe, and let's just for a moment say that it is true. That means that the best scenario vis-a-vis global warming is about 10 feet raise in water. That's the best scenario over the next 40, 50 years. That's the best scenario. If the water on the planet is going to rise up 10 feet, that means the southern part of the United States is gone. England is gone. Most of Europe is gone. And I can go, most of Central America is gone. Okay. If that's the case, let's just take Florida, for example, which is one of the fastest growing beachfront condominiums on the planet. In the prospectus, when you invest, there should be, in the footnotes, if global warming is for real, they won't put it that way, global warming happens and water rises 10 feet, this investment you made is fuck all. Not one single investment prospectus written since 2000, this century, has alluded to global warming. Not one motherfucker. If it were really true, the banks wouldn't invest. The banks wouldn't finance. Not one motherfucking condominium. So the people that have the money, and I'm jealous of the Vice President, Gore, which Sally and I rode on a plane from South America with a few years ago. I am jealous he came up with a scam before I did. Because the financial institutions, the banks of this world know it's not going to happen. Otherwise, you couldn't get a goddamn loan in London. You know those 30, 40-year mortgages? The world will be over by then. Is Barclays Bank going to give you a motherfucking loan? With the greatest respect, ma'am, it's the greatest fraud that's been perpetrated on mankind this century.
From heat waves to back-to-back hurricanes, one San Jose State professor says, get used to it. It may become our new normal. Tonight, she told KPX5's Marie Medina it is all connected to climate change.
back-to-back hurricanes Irma, Jose, Katia, and Harvey, which devastated parts of Texas.
It's got to be a 500-year flood or a 1,000-year flood. It's ridiculous.
Are all signs of what San Jose State meteorology professors like Allison Bridger.
There is the hurricane. You can see the eye really well.
Have taught students for years.
The oceans are warming up just as the atmosphere is warming up.
She says recent weather events across our country are proof of global warming. And now she says it's catching up to us.
We've been teaching about this stuff for over 20 years, and we're still not doing anything about it.
Another piece of evidence that climate change is happening, according to Professor Bridger, our own record-breaking heat wave over the weekend. So hot, it even caused equipment problems and delays for BART.
It's not like we broke the record by a teeny bit. We broke the record by a lot.
So the question is this the new norm?
I would tend to think so.
So what exactly does that mean? The professor says climate change means more and longer heat waves or cold weather, droughts, and even extreme rain events like hurricanes.
Harvey was probably able to grow strong because of the super warm temperatures in the ocean in the Gulf of Mexico.
Global concentrations of carbon dioxide have reached levels not seen for 2 million years. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration said today the monthly average crossed that line in March. It also said concentrations of heat-trapping gas are rising at a record pace.
In climate news, a major new study published in the journal Science finds the world's oceans are absorbing heat at a far faster rate than previously predicted, a finding with troubling implications for the future of life on Earth. The study found greenhouse gas emissions are warming the oceans 40% faster than even the dire predictions made by the UN's top climate scientists 5 years ago. The authors write, quote, "This warming has contributed to increases in rainfall intensity, rising sea levels, the destruction of coral reefs, declining ocean oxygen levels, and declines in ice sheets, glaciers, and ice caps in the polar regions."
Across Europe, a cold wave kept much of the continent in the deep freeze today. In Paris, layers of snow covered much of the city, disrupting travel in sub-zero weather. And off the Normandy coast, the famed tidal island, Mont Saint-Michel, was surrounded by snow and ice, a rarity.
Boston has finally set a dubious new record, most snow in a single winter. The city got nearly 3 more inches on Sunday, pushing the seasonal total to 108.6 inches. That's more than 9 feet of snow, and the most since Boston began keeping records in 1872.
The snow had many in Tahoe today saying so much for summer. The National Weather Service said up to 5 inches is expected in the higher elevations of the northern Sierra. Here's a view from our KPIX5 Sierra camp. These conditions forced the Weather Service to issue an advisory through tomorrow, warning drivers to be ready for winter driving conditions in June.
It's the biggest warning from the science community yet, a call for action. The IPCC's report is clear. Urgent and unprecedented changes are needed to keep global temperatures from rising to unbearable levels.
Limiting warming to 1.5 degrees is not impossible, but will require unprecedented transitions in all aspects of society. There are clear benefits to keep warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to 2 degrees or higher. Every bit of warming matters.
The 2015 Paris Agreement aimed at keeping a global temperature rise this century well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. But the IPCC's new report shows that the effects of global warming would already be disastrous with a 1.5 degree increase. 1.5 degrees would cause a rise in global water levels of about 48 centimeters. 56 centimeters if temperatures were to rise 2 degrees. The impact on the environment would be even more important. A rise in 2 degrees would cause the extinction of 18% of all insects, 16% of all plants, and 8% of all vertebrates. Not to mention the effect on human populations.
Limiting global warming to 1.5 compared to 2 degrees would reduce the number of people exposed to climate-related risks and susceptible to poverty by up to several hundred millions by 2050.
Limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius comes with a hefty price tag. Some 2.1 trillion euros would have to be invested every year for 25 years.
For example, if you tell people that 85 years down the road, 13 million people will be affected. If we take the most extreme projection, which is 1.8 meter sea level rise by 2100, but I think we need to take this study forward by doing another study of what is the impact of sea level rise right now in terms of frequent coastal flooding.
Global warming is changing horror movies, and it's not likely to stop anytime soon. Hello, I'm Jenna. I have a master's degree in media and culture, and I've spent years studying horror media and video game cultures and living on this planet. 3 things I love to do, which is why I, like many, are concerned about the increasingly irreversible damage we're doing to the planet. What does that have to do with horror? Well, we're seeing the growth of an entirely new subgenre of horror, which isn't necessarily unusual. Genres are created and abandoned all the time in connection with societal changes. Like in the mid-20th century when every TV show and movie was a Western. Or last year when every movie was a superhero film. Right now, we're seeing the emergence of eco-horror, stories in which the planet itself is the monster.
Is global warming causing goats to shrink? That's what researchers from the UK's Durham University are claiming. Researchers say smaller goats are evidence that global warming is impacting animal size. Durham researchers studied the body size of alpine chamois mountain goats over 3 decades and found that young chamois today weigh 25% less than their peers did in the 1980s. Researchers linked shrinking body sizes to increasing temperatures.
So a jeweler in Wilmington, North Carolina took a pretty big gamble, but it was his customers who won. Big. The store promised to refund everything customers bought if it snowed more than 3 inches in Asheville on Christmas Day. Well, it snowed more than 3 inches. In fact, more than 6 inches. And that really made Christmas special for at least one family.
It is a gamble, and luckily it worked out for us. It's only going to be about $150, but with my family of 5, $150 goes a long way. So getting $150 back would be really nice.
Well, that store sold $500,000 in jewelry during the promotion. The most expensive item was a $12,000 engagement ring. The couple plans to use that refund to pay for the wedding.
On the issue of climate change, I believe the climate changes. I believe in variations in the climate throughout history, and that's documented.
Yes, that's not the controversy.
But the facts are these. The facts are these, and this is by the National Oceanographic Agency, that from 1975 until about 2000, the global mean surface temperature increased by about 0.5 degrees centigrade. Since 2000, it has not increased at all.
Bullshit.
No, I mean that.
What I don't understand
that's a federal government.
But isn't it the most? But let's assume for a moment there's no climate change. Why isn't it the religious, God-fearing thing to do to protect our Earth under any circumstances? Why isn't that the imperative? Why should you need a statistic to teach you that?
Okay. That's a straw man. Everybody agrees that we should be good stewards of God's creation. Everybody agrees on that. We're all for clean air.
Reducing
we're all for
carbon
clean
emissions.
Water. The problem is the unintended consequences. Let me just give you one example. You probably supported, when you were in Congress, certainly the Bush administration did, an ethanol mandate that would say that 10% of the gasoline when you went to the pump would be ethanol, okay, for purposes of lowering carbon emissions. What people didn't calculate is 1/3 of the U.S. corn crop got diverted to gasoline. What happened? Relief agencies trying to feed the poor in Africa. In Mexico, where 1/3 of the population lives on $5 or less a day, there were riots.
Well, what about increasing fuel efficiency by 50%?
Double.
Okay. But didn't it, in the Bible, didn't it rain bread? Yeah.
Only for a while.
No, it rained. Okay, so things have changed. It didn't rain bread, dummy. It rained frogs. Oh, whatever. God made...
Come on now. He doesn't stop.
It rained bread.
I'm a commercial crabber, and I've been working in the Chesapeake Bay for 50-plus years. And I have a crab house business out on the water. And the water level is the same as it was when the place was built in 1970. I'm not a scientist, but I'm a keen observer. And if sea level rise is occurring, why am I not seeing signs of it? Our island is disappearing. but it's because of erosion and not sea level rise. And unless we get a seawall, we will lose our island. But back to the question, why am I not seeing signs of the sea level rise?
What do you think the erosion is due to, Mayor?
Wave action, storms.
Has that increased any?
Not really.
So you're losing the island even though the waves haven't increased?
Yes, this erosion has been going on since Captain John Smith discovered the island and named it.
Yeah,
and it's gotten to our doorstep now, and we focus on it more.
Well, arguments about science aren't necessarily going to be of any comfort to you, and I'm sorry for what you're going through and your neighbors on Tangier Island. I read about you in the paper. There was an article in the Washington Post, I believe, after President Trump called you up. And it won't necessarily do you any good for me to tell you that the scientists do say that the sea level is rising in the Chesapeake Bay and that you've lost about 2/3 of your island already over a longer period of time, and that the forecast for the future is another 2 feet of sea level. What would if there was another 2 feet of sea level rise, what would that mean for Tangier Island?
Tangier Island, our elevation is only about 4 foot above sea level.
Yeah.
And if I see sea level rise occurring, I'll shout it from the housetop.
Okay.
I mean, we don't have, the land to give up, but I'm just not seeing it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one of the challenges of this issue is taking what the scientists say and translating it into terms that are believable to people where they can see the consequences in their own lives. And I get that, and I try every day to figure out ways to do that.
Fortune, because on some of them you may think, well, I can follow her on X issue, but on Y, that is the reality. She's wrong. Well, let's have a discussion about that. So I'll start with perhaps the most contentious of all, which is man-made global warming. And I will put my cards on the table, and I will say there is little, if anything, to support the idea that something extraordinary and unprecedented is happening to the climate. For example, it was warmer thousands of years ago. For example, the link between carbon dioxide and temperature is not straightforward. For example, the seas are not rising, the ice is not shrinking, the polar bears are not vanishing, and Al Gore did not deserve his Nobel Prize. There's been no significant warming since 1995, despite the fact that we're told that if carbon dioxide increases, the temperature will increase. Carbon dioxide has increased, the temperature has not increased. And the most important thing of all is that the argument that the climate, which is possibly the most complex system that there is, the idea that it A can be predicted and B can be altered by changing one component is absurd.
So here is now what I worry about very much is the conference going to be in Paris in November. And I really worry about that, because when the conference was in Copenhagen, that almost became a disaster, but nothing got decided. But now I think the people who are alarmists have a very strong position. And so the Physical Society always have made up their mind, so I don't have to worry about them. But the facts are that in the last 100 years or so we have measured the temperature. It has gone up 0.8 degrees, and everything in the world has gotten better. See? So how can they say it's going to get worse? When we have the evidence that if it's true that they can measure, at least they believe it, when the temperature has gone up 0.8 degree, everything, we live longer, we have better work, better health, better everything. But if you go another 0.8 degrees, we're going to die, I guess. And I say this to Obama, excuse me, Mr. President, but you're wrong. See, he's dead wrong. And I said that once I was part of an ad in the Time magazine, and I said the same thing. Because I think Obama is a clever person, but he gets bad advice. And in global warming, he's all that. See, I would say that the global warming basically is a non-problem. Just leave it alone, take care of itself.
It's quite a special moment when we come out of the forest, come over this rise, and bam, right in front of us is this huge, giant white face of the snout at the end of the glacier. And we just kind of had a moment of taking it in and him realizing this is why he's fought so hard for all he's doing to try and protect our planet.
You know, most problems in the world, as tragic as they may be, are fixable. You know, you can reverse trends. This is one of those trends where if it starts accelerating too fast, then we can be too late.
Because when the planet warmed beginning in 1976, the temperature of the stratosphere started to drop. And that's a prediction of greenhouse theory that's not intuitive. You know, the great philosopher of science, Karl Popper, said, if you can meet a difficult prediction with your theory, you can continue to entertain your theory. So the theory's right, but the application of it is wrong. It is nowhere near as warm as it's supposed to be. The computer models are making systematic, dramatic errors over the entire tropics, which is 40% of the Earth, and it's where all our moisture comes from, or almost all of it.
Let me stop you there.
Yeah.
Who does these computer models?
Governments. There are 32 families of computer models that are used by the United Nations, each government-sponsored, and all of them are predicting far, far too much warming. The disparity between what's been predicted to happen, which looks like this, and what is happening continues to grow.
We know that for a fact.
Yeah, because you can just look at the weather balloon temperatures, you can look at the satellite temperatures, you can look at something called the reanalysis data. They all behave in concert. So they're showing the same thing, and the same thing is a lot different than this thing. However, one model works. And you know what it is? It's the Russian model.
So let me get this. So all the government models are like this?
Yeah.
The Russian model is like this?
Yeah. The Russian model has the least warming in it.
And the Russian model is the least warming, and the Russian model pretty much follows reality.
Yeah.
What's been tested over a few decades.
Yeah, correct. You know, if we were rational about this, think about the daily weather forecast. You know, you watch the Weather Channel, they go, oh, this model says that, that model says that. We think this one's working the best, so we're going to rely on that. Well, for climate forecast, we should be using the Russian model, but we're not. We use this big spate of all the other models that have this warming in them that's not occurring.
Why are all these other government models, 31 of them, I guess,
yeah,
wrong? And why do they all go in the same direction, up?
Because they are what is called parameterized. They're all parameterized. Can I translate parameterized into English? Fudged.
Okay.
The don't get the right answer, don't know the right answer for certain phenomena. So we essentially put in code steps that give us what we think it should be. And the systematic error that was made was the models were tuned, as it said, tuned to simulate the warming of the early 20th century. Began in 1910, ended in 1945, about 0.45 degrees Celsius. Mark, that could not have been caused by carbon dioxide.
Because there wasn't enough.
We had to put enough in. The background carbon dioxide concentration is 280 parts per million. When the first warming started, it was 298 parts per million. If the atmosphere is that sensitive to an 18 ppm change in CO2, we wouldn't be talking about this right now, and we'd be sweating bullets.
Pollen counts across the country are exploding. 30% of the country tonight is in the medium-high range. The areas in red here on your screen are where it's worst. Errol Barnett reports from North Carolina.
When an annual rite of spring collided with an incoming thunderstorm in North Carolina recently, the pictures looked like Armageddon, or Polmageddon, as photographer Jeremy Gilchrist described his drone footage showing tree pollen hovering in the atmosphere. It left a thick, yellow pollen film, everything outside coated by the male flower seed.
So, Doctor, these are the culprits right now, anyway. Yeah, these are the bad actors you see. So sort of the tallest ones there, the big towering pine trees.
A recent study analyzed pollen data from 17 locations across the globe and found that climate change may be making things worse. Allergist Dr. David Fitzhugh.
You know, as we see climate change evolving, allergy seasons tend to start earlier, they tend to last longer, and the absolute pollen counts are much higher.
Last week, the pollen count in North Carolina was the highest of the year at more than 3,200 grains per cubic meter of air, or very high. And this video from Tennessee shows just how much pollen is visible throughout the South. That's bad news for the more than 50 million Americans with seasonal allergies.
You addressed the UN recently. Well, yeah, you did. What, are you shocked? You did. You were there.
I think so. Yeah, I was. That was quite an honor.
What were you talking about?
Climate change. And it was about the fact that we've been talking about climate change for 20 years. It's time to stop talking about it and do something about it. So urgency was a theme in speaking.
Why are there still deniers?
Well, you can answer that as well as I can.
Look at the weather. I mean, how can you deny it?
If you belong to a certain group of people that are afraid of change, which I think some people are, and so they're going to deny change when it happens.
So they just deny it, but isn't it obvious that we're going
Well,
through?
it is to you and to me, and probably is to them, but they don't want to admit it because it means they're going to have to accept change or they're going to have to give up something. I don't know what the deal is.
What do you think of Obama's clean power plan?
Well, I like his plan. I mean, I think, look, it's puzzling because he's doing so many great things I really do support. Then it comes to the Arctic drilling, and I can't put that one together. I just can't put that one together. Because once you start that, once you drill in the Arctic, you're looking at the end game, I think. And so that's puzzling to me because he's doing so many good things, which I totally support. And then something like that comes around, and you say, well, what's going on? It's kind of hard to figure out.
Are you endorsing someone for president?
Yes, I have just decided to endorse my longtime friend, Senator Clinton. I think that Bernie Sanders is overpromising. He's insensitive to the plight of black people. And what good is it if you don't take lobbyist money and you don't acknowledge the number one threat to America and to the world is the factory farming lobby, because it is poisoning the planet quickly, and it is poisoning its inhabitants. So the shift has to be made away from the animal product, away from the beef industry specifically, but all the animal products, into a plant-based diet, or there will be no planet. And in the next 50 years, we won't even have an ocean. And when the oceans die, we die. So we must change the rate at which we consume animals. And we cannot have a lobbyist take advantage of all our natural resources in order to poison the planet and its people. And I asked him about it, and he brushed it off, even though he knows that your earthquake and certainly all of these storms are a result of factory farming. We now have all the proof in the world that climate change is man-made, and we have to do something to derail it. So that, to me, aside from his insensitivity to black voters...
Do you really think Bernie Sanders is insensitive to the needs of the black community?
Yes, he's insensitive in a number of ways, and I would get into it if we had time. But I think Senator Clinton has been sensitive, supportive of a progressive agenda. She's realistic in what she can get done. She's able to beat the Republican candidate, and I think that Bernie Sanders would not be able to or could lose, and I don't want to take that chance.
Is it correct that the satellite data over the last 18 years demonstrate no significant warming?
No.
How is it incorrect?
Based upon our experts, it's been refuted long ago, and it's not up for scientific debate.
I'm curious I want to understand this. I do find it highly interesting that the president of the Sierra Club, when asked what the satellite data demonstrate about warming, apparently is relying on staff. So
it's just a mistake.
The nice thing about the satellite data is these are objective numbers.
Correct.
And the numbers over the last 18 years, are you familiar with the phrase the pause?
The answer is yes, and essentially we rest on our position.
And to what you said you are familiar with the pause, so to what does the phrase the pause refer? I'm sorry, you said you were familiar with that term, so I asked to what does it refer?
Essentially, it's the slowing in global warming during the 40s, sir.
During the 40s? Is it not the term that global warming alarmists have used to explain the inconvenient truth, to use a phrase popularized by former Vice President Al Gore, that the satellite data over the last 18 years demonstrate no significant warming whatsoever. Global warming alarmists call that the pause because the computer models say there should be dramatic warming, and yet the actual satellites taking the measurement don't show any significant warming.
But, Senator, 97% of the scientists concur and agree that there is global warming and anthropogenic impact with regards to global warming.
The problem with that statistic that gets cited a lot is it's based on one bogus study. And indeed, your response, I would point that your response is quite striking. I asked about the science and the evidence, the actual data. We have satellites. They're measuring temperature. That should be relevant. And your answer was, pay no attention to your lying eyes and the numbers that the satellites show. Instead, listen to the scientists who are receiving massive grants who tell us, do not debate the science.
Today was France's hottest day on record. Temperatures there reached over 114 degrees. A heat wave from sub-Saharan Africa has spread across large parts of Europe all week. The system spans from the UK to Italy to the Czech Republic. In Berlin, police deployed water cannons to salvage dying grass and trees. In Catalonia, firefighters struggled to control a wildfire under scorching temperatures. Tonight, Paris was baking as the U.S. women's soccer team defeated France at the World Cup. While it's difficult to attribute any particular weather event to climate change, there's growing evidence that climate change is changing the way the jet stream flows, and that can make these events worse. Michael Mann is an atmospheric scientist at Penn State University.
So this extreme heat is due to the fact that we're seeing these really large wiggles in the jet stream. The jet stream's slowing down, so these high and low pressure systems get stuck in place. And where you get one of these high pressure systems stuck in place, like we saw last year in California, you get extreme heat.
Ken Bell of San Marcos, Texas. The heat wave and floods came as protests against the fossil fuel companies largely responsible for climate change faced protests across the United States. On Sunday in Santa Barbara, California, residents protested a major oil spill, which has killed wildlife and soiled beaches. In Bellingham, Washington, 2 protesters suspended themselves from the anchor chain of a ship to oppose Shell's plans to drill for oil in the Arctic. Chiara D'Angelo hung from the anchor of the Arctic Challenger from Friday till Monday morning, while fellow protester Matt Fuller joined her for 22 hours on Saturday and Sunday. Meanwhile, the University of Hawaii has voted to divest its $66 million endowment from fossil fuels, becoming the largest university to heed the growing divestment movement to date.
I've often heard it said that there is a consensus of thousands of scientists on the global warming issue and that humans are causing a catastrophic change to the climate system. Well, I am one scientist, and there are many that simply think that is not true.
Man-made global warming is no ordinary scientific theory.
This morning, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change made up of...
It is presented in the media as having the stamp of authority of an impressive international organization.
From the IPCC,
the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC.
The IPCC, like any UN body, is political. The final conclusions are politically driven.
This claim that the IPCC is the world's top 1,500 or 2,500 scientists, you look at the bibliographies of the people and it's simply not true. There are quite a number of non-scientists.
And to build the number up to 2,500, they have to start taking reviewers and government people and so on, anyone who ever came close to them. And none of them are asked to agree. Many of them disagree.
Those people who are specialists but don't agree with the polemic and resign, and there have been a number that I know of, they are simply put on the author list and become part of this 2,500 of the world's top scientists.
People have decided you have to convince other people that since no scientist disagrees, you shouldn't disagree either. But that, whenever you hear that in science, that's pure propaganda.
I'm going to show my support by donating to No Agenda. Imagine all the people who could do that. Oh yeah, that'd be fab. Yeah,
on No Agenda in the morning. Well, I don't want to say too much, but we got the best clips.
We have a lot of clips. This show has been
is built on a house of clips.
Oh, House of Clips. Oh, I like that a lot. House of Clips. Yeah, totally. It's outrageous when you really put it all together like that and you hear it. You're right. It just sounds like the normal, sane people are saying some kind of normal stuff and everyone else is insane.
Yeah, the insanity comes through. It's I don't know what to make of it, but it's kind of pathetic. It doesn't get any better in the second half. Well, I should mention, of course, we do have a donation segment we can't do because the donators will be all pushed to show 1338. So anyone who's donated to the show will be hearing about it on 1338. We'll have a long donation segment.
If someone does a elite donation, which we're missing, which is sad, but...
Well, that'll be the next show.
That's what I'm going to say. Okay, so but I mean...
Yeah, it'll be the newsletter. We'll put in the elite donations coming up for the next show.
All right.
And that'll also we'll read out all the elite donors on show 1338, so we appreciate that.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll get a bunch of those because
everyone wanted to be a producer on Elite for sure. And we appreciate it.
We'll make them producers.
Yeah, I was going to say, we really appreciate the support and in particular the support that we can go and get a little headspace cleaned out. At least it's for me. I'm speaking on my behalf. I need a rest. I need to unplug. I really don't intend to be communicating much. I'm just going to go, I just want to lay down for a week.
I know you. You end up collecting clips from wherever you go. Waco, I think, is where you're
headed. Yes. Temple. That's where we're going. Yeah.
So how was San Antonio?
I got to tell you, Galveston's beautiful this time of year.
It is.
It is, actually. All right. So please remember us in case you forgot. If you'd like to support us, either directly for the shows with the show number or executive or associate executive producership, or if you want to get on one of our programs.
Dvorak.org/NA.
And I think we can go into part 2 now.
Part 2, here we go.
I just don't know if they're going to do anything. And I'm so concerned with the fact that if they're not going to change anything, then what's going to happen to humankind? What's going to happen to the whole world if no one does anything?
Let me be very blunt about this. Coal represents perhaps the greatest challenge to Canada or to the world not meeting its climate change targets. Unless we reduce coal consumption, we are not going to be able to create catastrophic global warming.
But what we do know, the two largest impacts on temperature are the El Niños in the Pacific, as well as volcanic eruptions, which shade the Earth when they put the dust and smoke in the stratosphere. So once you account for both of those, there's not a whole lot of warming in the planet. The conclusion we have reached is that the global climate is not very sensitive to carbon dioxide. And that can occur if the climate responds in its many facets to release heat when you add the heat from carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide does allow more heat to be retained in the system, the climate system, but the climate system also has many ways to allow an increased release of heat to space. And so we think that's what's going on, that there are feedbacks that are allowing that heat to escape and not accumulate the way models have indicated.
You will see our capital city flooded to the top of the buses. You will see houses smashed to flinders and boats thrown up onto the land. That was with a sea 10 inches below what we have now. And every responsible scientist tells us the risk of worse and bigger ocean storms has increased because of the emission of carbons.
Climate change, you're a threat. How many years do we have left?
Excuse me, do you guys have a moment to talk about climate change?
We polled kids across Canada and asked them to rank election issues in order of priority. 74% ranked climate change as the issue most important to them.
Climate scientists are now saying we only have 12 years left to act if we want to avoid catastrophic damage.
Down.
That's why we're lobbying the federal government to lower the voting age from 18 to 8. Let the kids vote! Let the kids vote! Let the kids vote!
They are the future. They deserve a say. And if we work together, we can lower the voting age.
1, 2, 3, 4. Climate change is not a choice.
This guy can vote, and then I can't.
These kids are not here to kid around.
Let the kids vote. Let the kids vote.
Let the kids vote.
Let the kids vote.
Let kids vote.
Future decide. Let the kids vote.
What's absolutely clear about climate change is that it's a big problem and it's urgent, and we all absolutely need to do something about it. But there's no absolute certainty over the timescales. Sometimes we've been hearing recently about a 12-year timescale, and in some ways that's useful to think about. But nobody really knows whether 10 years might be a timescale that we've got before something really nasty, before we start tipping a feedback mechanism that makes quite nasty things happen in our climate, or whether we've got 15 years, or whether we've already gone over that tipping point.
Well, French wine won't be flowing quite so freely this year. Climate change making sure of that. The world's number 2 wine producer has seen its crop shrink due to extreme weather. Some farmers have lost 85% of their harvest due to frosty weather. Not quite the chilled Chablis that wine connoisseurs had in mind.
So much to get into, more coming up later on. But just very quickly, do you both despair about the fact that this is, in America there is a certain strain of evangelical thinking which says this is not happening because God would not let this happen, and it's not just a minority report. These people are in the White House. In rational terms, do we need a new president for the planet?
Well, it's your dad's obsession, isn't it? He's got panels on the roof, the electric car. Is he mad?
No, because it will help the world from global warming.
Do you think so?
Yeah.
Do you agree with all this?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Well, but the thing is, your house is the only one in the street with solar panels on, isn't it? So, what difference is this making?
It helps the world from global warming, so we need to get other people to do this.
Yeah. So how do you get other people to do it?
We talk to them and we let them know the consequences of it.
Do you really? Go around schools saying, "Oi, go green"?
Well, that's what we need to do.
Okay.
We need to get...
Yes?
Yeah.
All right. And so you two, as I understand it, have never been on a plane, is that right?
No.
Not even a propeller plane?
No.
Or in a glider?
No.
Why do you think that is?
Because the fumes from the plane pollute the world.
And where do your friends go on holiday?
Well, my friends usually go to, Tunisia and Mexico on planes.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Where do you go?
We usually go to France and Germany and places like that.
Right, so you're not flying. Do you feel you're missing out at all?
Not really, but because it's quite good as it's not polluting the world.
How much of it is some cyclical geologic history? And even if the contribution we're making is just the one straw that breaks the camel's back, isn't that enough to get you to want to curtail our behavior?
I think that's actually a really good question. I'm glad you asked it. Because people keep telling climate scientists, the climate's always changed. And we're like, we know, we told you that. We are essentially the people who study that. We figured that out. What percentage of the warming right now are humans responsible for? Over 100%. Humans are responsible for more than all of the warming, because if it wasn't for us, the Earth would be cooling very slightly.
It would be.
Because of what the sun's doing. The sun is getting ever so slightly weaker. So yeah, if it wasn't for us, tiny variation in the sun's output would be making it colder.
And as Secretary Kerry has recently noted, climate change can produce effects similar to those of weapons of mass destruction. We know that climate change will affect virtually every country on Earth. It is, after all, global climate warming. Other nations around the world are also viewing this as a national security risk. As to your governance piece, that is part of the governance piece. The American Security Project surveyed every country in the world and asked if climate change was included in their national security strategies, and 70% of nations said that it was.
The development of LaGuardia Airport also goes to the issue of climate change.
Absolutely. You know, we already are experiencing a 2-foot sea level rise in our areas of New York 14, which directly border LaGuardia Airport. So we're already starting to see sometimes flights get delayed because so much water and very heavy storms is starting to kind of take over these runways. These areas of LaGuardia Airport are experiencing and are going to be facing very extreme levels of sea level rises. And we need to figure out how we're going to either protect the airport or how we're going to adjust basically our infrastructure to accommodate for that.
California's Governor Jerry Brown announcing late Friday, in the face of global warming, of climate change, and of what he calls the lack of a federal response, that the state of California is going to send its own satellite into orbit to track the progress of climate change, which of course is causing hurricanes to be stronger and more severe. I talked to Jerry Brown at his Global Climate Action Summit late Friday, a gathering of state, local, and world leaders. We're in the midst of hurricanes and the aftermath of hurricanes, and you still have the President of the United States denying the science of climate change. How do you counteract that?
Well, first I want to say it's really extraordinary that the President can deny science like that, but he's done so many other what's the word? I don't even have an adjective. So it's bad, and how we counteract it is with this climate summit, with normal people respecting the truth and communicating that with other normal people and combating the President of the United States in what are lies, distortions, and quite frankly bizarre behavior. So we have to keep at it, and I'm glad you gave me a chance to answer your question, because we can't say it enough. The president is just wrong.
San Francisco alone, Bayside sea level rise from global warming places at risk $10 billion of public property and as much as $39 billion of private property.
And in fact, the lawsuit demands the oil companies create an abatement fund in the billions of dollars to reimburse Oakland and San Francisco for damage related to climate change.
One of the great puzzles in climate science is why, over the past 15 years, global warming has paused. Now, one theory is that there's less output, less energy reaching us from the sun. Another is that industrial pollution is reflecting some of that energy back out into space. But perhaps the most plausible answer, in the view of many scientists, lies in the oceans. If the air isn't warming up, maybe this vast body of water is. But it's quite a job trying to work out what's happening.
And we've got to remember that they are fleeing the deadliest countries on the face of the planet today, compounded by drought that was caused not by God, not by Mother Nature, but by us. Man-made climate change, our emissions, our excesses, our inaction in the face of the facts and the science. When it is that deadly, and when you're unable to grow your own food to feed yourself, you have no choice but to come here.
I don't know. I'm just not myself lately. Everything seems so meaningless and empty. Go on. Well, I know the planet's getting hotter and hotter, and I know we're going to have forest fires and droughts and floods like you've never seen. We're going to have storms and hurricanes, and species are disappearing. Sometimes I just want to close my eyes and pretend it's not happening. There. That's better. Maybe I'm fine. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe this whole climate change fiasco is just some sort of scam, a government scare tactic. Man, I hope so. What's happening to me?
It sounds to me like you're suffering from grief. Climate change grief.
Climate change grief? I mean, that's not even a thing.
That is a thing. And you are struggling with the first of 5 stages of grief. Denial.
Denial?
I don't believe it.
You see, that's what I'm talking about. Here's what I want you to do. When you leave this office, you're going to go and confront denial head on.
Okay.
All right. Session is over. Why don't we see each other again next week?
Okay. Have a good weekend, Dr. Schwarzenegger.
Hasta la vista, Billy.
Well, media organizations, including NPR, have pointed out the connection between the polar vortex in the Midwest and climate change. I noticed on a network news show, which are often criticized for not making that connection to climate change. David, how have news organizations evolved in connecting these extreme weather stories to the overall trend of climate change?
CBS This Morning, they're no fools in acknowledging that role. You've seen their sort of increasing efforts by scientists and some journalists with specialty in the area to incorporate that as the science seems to be clearer about not just the fact that that man-made emissions and carbon and the warming of the environment are present and having an effect, but that you can start to make connection to individual events. And so you're starting to see that. That is a change. You used to see particularly meteorologists on TV, especially local but also national TV, really resist talking about climate. They're going to say, we're talking about weather. Climate is global. Climate is a whole different layer there. It's too unpredictable. Heck, we have trouble predicting more than 10 days out. And what you've seen is sort of a joining of meteorology and climate science to say, yeah, these things are interconnected in a real way. And therefore you can start to see this in all kinds of coverage from local TV to, national newspapers.
And then there is Brian Kilmeade here on Fox and Friends on Fox News. Listen.
It was true that the climate change became climate change when global warming wasn't adding up to global warming. It was going very cold, and then people say with the temperature went up a couple of degrees, they go, we'll change it. We're going to start using climate change. So anytime there's a tornado, a typhoon, a flood, what did I tell you? And then hence starts the debate.
David, what about that? Have we got past that where we can recognize that global warming is the overall trend, even if it means severe winter storms?
What climate change really means is there's global warming in the atmosphere is warming, and all kinds of other things are warming. And at the same time, it's calling all kinds of weather disruption and spikes and variables in all directions. The real thing is, in some ways, that climate change became very much part of the political vernacular in the 1990s, in part as a result of Newt Gingrich, the Congress that came to power in 1995 in opposition to the Clinton White House, wanted to call it something that seemed less threatening than global warming, and they focus group tested the phrase climate change, and it seemed less threatening to people at a time they were trying to hold down certain kinds of regulations.
My name is Elizabeth Curran. I'm 10 years old and I live in Winnipeg. Being a young person, what I find most concerning about climate change is that animals can lose their homes, like polar bears, if the ice melts.
My name is Arthur. I am 9 years old. I live in Iqaluit. It's a bit scary because I live near the ocean. And if there's a glacier that melts, it will make the water go close to my house.
My name is Ben Bizaillon. I am 15 and I live in Montreal, Quebec. I think that it's time for the governments to do big things, but just because the governments are doing big things doesn't mean that people should stop doing small things, that everyone should just, without necessarily sacrificing everything yet, just do what they can to reduce the footprint and help us not be doomed.
My name is Meowta Stout. I'm 12 years old and I live in Winnipeg. The thing that scares me the most about climate change is literally everything. It's terrifying. It's kind of been pushed to the side, and it's just not knowing anything about it is kind of what scares me about it. And just knowing that it's gonna kill us if we don't do anything, which we're not doing anything, that's the scary part to me.
My name is Patrick. I'm 10 years old, and I was born in China, but now I live in Vancouver. Young children will experience far worse than the people living right now. It also scares me that floods, hurricanes, and other natural disasters are way more likely than in the past 5 years. I think grown-ups should think that we actually should make an impact and not just sit back and let it happen.
Well, a great example is the Victory Gardens. So during World War II, 40% of American vegetables were grown at home in the front and backyard by the people that ate them, right? We can farm our lawns and have community farms which increases, local food security, and also, you don't have emissions from transportation. But more generally, programs like transitioning industry, right? So the United States banned the production of new consumer automobiles because they said we need all of that automobile factory capacity to create our tanks and planes and machine guns. And so no more consumer car production, period. Sorry. It's a fundamentally different mentality when you get into the mode of we face an existential threat, everything is on the line, and so the government is going to do everything that it can. The government should spend without limit to save as much life as possible.
My name's Deborah Harford. I'm the Executive Director of the Adaptation to Climate Change team at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. A low-carbon resilient future is a beautiful one. A lot less noisy, polluting cars filling up most of our urban downtown areas. More parks, more areas for kids to play, more places for people to grow food, more shared spaces, more places where people can come together and enjoy their environment. I heard a very interesting presentation from a woman who works with small children recently, and so she asks them to draw. She says, if we carry on how we're living in the world, what do you think the future looks like? And she said that without fail, they draw a world in which everything's on fire and everything is dead and everyone is sick.
Instead, I will ask the people around the world to realize that our political leaders have failed us, because we are facing an existential threat, and there is no time to continue down this road of madness. Rich countries like Sweden need to start reducing emissions by at least 15% every year to stay below a 2-degree warming target. You would think the media and every one of our leaders would be talking about nothing else, but they never even mention it. Nor does hardly anyone ever mention that we are in the midst of the 6th mass extinction, with up to 200 species going extinct every single day.
Emissions by, let's say, 30%. Without any, it's not like we'd all have to go back to caves and, live off, fire. We could have electricity and smartphones and all that stuff. Which would buy us probably another 20, 30 years for that technological breakthrough that's necessary. The reason we don't do it is because we are still confused, blind, shrouded with hate, anger, racism, mommy issues. We are fraught with stuff, and so if that's the case, then the single most important thing that we have to invest in is not all. And look, I'm a huge supporter of science and technological research and social science and evidence-based learning and all that good stuff. People call me Spock for a reason. I believe in reason and logic and all these Enlightenment values. But the thing that really we have to invest in is people. We got to get people to figure out how they work together in a, how do we get people to work together in a cooperative, thoughtful, constructive way?
On Capitol Hill, police arrested 51 youth climate activists Tuesday as they held a nonviolent sit-in protest out inside the office of House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi, demanding a Green New Deal and urgent action on climate change. Philadelphia activist Sophia Zaya of the Sunrise Movement said she's compelled to act because of the historic wildfires raging in Pelosi's home state of California.
Back in Nancy Pelosi's home state, 42 people were just burned alive by wildfires that are described as fire tsunamis that we literally do not know how to fight. And she's come to that crisis with a water gun, saying that she's going to revive a committee to talk about evidence of climate change that maybe would have been helpful back in 1968 when Exxon first learned about climate change, but that today is so far from what we need.
A new study says global warming will cause a beer shortage because barley is sensitive to extreme drought and heat. I could not hope anymore that this study is wrong. A co-author of the study published Monday in the journal Nature Plants said the study is trying to show that climate change will impact your quality of life.
Is this the future of food? Here in Silicon Valley, scientists have taken cells plucked from the feathers of a chicken and are using them to grow meat in this high-tech laboratory. Which means the chicken I'm about to eat is, weirdly, still alive.
So there we have it, our Just Chicken Nuggets with a little bit of Chipotle Ranch dipping sauce there. Yeah.
I'm going to dip it in the sauce, take a bite.
It's really tasty. It tastes like chicken. It tastes like chicken.
It is chicken, yeah.
Although the taste is very similar, the physicality, the feel of it in your mouth is slightly different.
Right. And, there are ways we can work on getting that together. I think, there's, like I said, finding things in the animal kingdom or 3D printing scaffolding. So there's a lot of different ways we can do it.
This firm says its chicken will be on a restaurant menu by the end of this year, probably somewhere in Asia.
This is the transitional way from raising and confining animals in the way we do. The reality is 99% of all the meat we eat comes from places that if we looked inside, we wouldn't be that proud of. Meat production is just as responsible for carbon emissions and climate change as all the cars we have on the street today.
But will anyone actually want to eat it? Ranchers have concerns too. Missouri has already banned the use of the word meat to label lab-grown products. Whatever it's called, with America's largest meat processor now investing in lab-grown meat, we may be about to see a new agricultural revolution.
What is the thing that worries you the most about climate?
We've had relatively stable climate. No ice ages, no hot spells, and we've had these ice caps that have remained, primarily in Antarctica and Greenland. Oh my gosh, if you melt those ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica, the water levels will rise and come to the level of the Statue of Liberty's elbow, okay?
Karen Phillips wants to change climate, then read history. Go back a little bit, read history. It's been validated by the geology. It's been validated by so many proxies. And what we see is climate always changes. I'm not a climate denier. It's the people who want to have global warming deny that climate changes. They deny what we have known for thousands of years. Climate always changes.
Some people evidently can still deny the reality. It's a little bit harder to deny the 3,000 deaths in Puerto Rico from Hurricane Maria last year. Come on! How far down that rabbit hole are people going to follow? This is utter insanity. We have to wake up. We are alive in this moment. We are awake.
I am a geologist and geophysicist. I have a bachelor's degree in geology from Indiana University and a PhD in geophysics from the University of Utah. My field of specialization in geophysics is temperature and heat flow. In recent years, I have turned my studies to the history and philosophy of science. In 1995, I published a short paper in the academic journal Science. In that study, I reviewed how borehole temperature data recorded a warming of about 1 degree Celsius in North America over the last 100 to 150 years. The week the article appeared, I was contacted by a reporter for National Public Radio. He offered to interview me, but only if I would state that the warming was due to human activity. When I refused to do so, he hung up on me. I had another interesting experience around the time my paper in Science was published. I received an astonishing email from a major researcher in the area of climate change. He said, quote, "We have to get rid of the medieval warm period," unquote. The medieval warm period was a time of unusually warm weather that began around 1000 AD and persisted until a cold period known as the Little Ice Age took hold in the 14th century. Warmer climate brought a remarkable flowering of prosperity, knowledge, and art to Europe during the High Middle Ages. The existence of the medieval warm period had been recognized in the scientific literature for decades, but now it was a major embarrassment to those maintaining that the 20th century warming was truly anomalous. It had to, quote, "be gotten rid of," unquote. In 1769, Joseph Priestley warned that scientists overly attached to a favored hypothesis would not hesitate to warp the whole course of nature. In 1999, Michael Mann and his colleagues published a reconstruction of past temperature in which the medieval warm period simply vanished. This unique estimate became known as the hockey stick because of the shape of the temperature graph. Normally in science, when you have a novel result that appears to overturn previous work, you have to demonstrate why the earlier work was wrong. But the work of Mann and his colleagues was initially accepted uncritically, even though it contradicted the results of more than 100 previous studies. Other researchers have since reaffirmed that the medieval warm period was both warm and global in its extent. There is an overwhelming bias today in the media regarding the issue of global warming. In the past 2 years, this bias has bloomed into an irrational hysteria. Every natural disaster that occurs is now linked with global warming, no matter how tenuous or impossible the connection. As a result, the public has become vastly misinformed on this and other environmental issues. Earth's climate system is complex and poorly understood. But we do know that throughout human history, warmer temperatures have been associated with more stable climates and increased human health and prosperity. Colder temperatures have been correlated with climatic instability, famine, and increased human mortality. The amount of climatic warming that has taken place in the past 150 years is poorly constrained, and its cause, human or natural, is unknown. There is no sound scientific basis for predicting future climate change with any degree of certainty.
Well, according to UK government scientists, on Monday, the traditional British meal of fish and chips may soon need to be replaced due to global climate change. Cod and haddock, two of the most commonly used fish for the popular dish, are shifting northward because of the warming sea temperatures. According to Britain's Center for the Environment, new species like squid and red mullet are moving into British waters from the south. In an interview with the BBC, John Pinniger, the program director for marine climate change, said, "I think people are slowly becoming more adventurous, and I think people should learn to eat what we're catching around our own waters. In the long term, we will need to adapt our diets."
In the totally different category of climate science, there was a big study this week, and usually when climate studies come out, we're looking at environmental impacts. But what was interesting about this one was it was looking at economic impacts. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, this one is a very impressive study on climate change. Scientists in the climate realm teamed up with economists, the dismal science meeting climate science, if you will, and they looked at the economic impacts of climate change as you project out to the future. And perhaps the most interesting finding was that climate change will hit different socioeconomic classes differently. Here's Berkeley scientist and lead author of the study, Solomon Shung.
In the south, where it's hot and along the coast, we might see populations losing the equivalent of 20% of their income. Whereas in the cooler northern and western regions, we actually see that populations might benefit a little. And because the north tends to be wealthier and the south tends to be poorer, what we see is that in the future, climate change is going to increase economic inequality within the United States.
Know if the president is going to walk away from this agreement, but it looks like he is going to. I know you agree with that. So help me understand. Make the best case why he should leave Paris.
Well, I think the key point to understand is that the Paris Treaty has no discernible impact on global average temperature, and therefore the alleged climate benefits are illusory. This is an agreement that if every country met its obligations according to the conventional EPA model, would reduce global average temperature less than 0.2 of a degree in the year 2100. But of course, these countries are mostly not meeting their obligations. We just heard from Germany, their emissions are up in each of the last 2 years. The Philippines have already withdrawn from this agreement, and India, which is allowed to increase emissions under this agreement, is building too many coal plants to even meet their target. They're going to go well above it. The U.S. commitment would only avert an increase in temperature of about 15 thousandths of a degree by the year 2100. So there's really not much upside here, but there's tremendous downside, because this agreement locks in those EPA regulations you were just talking about in the introduction, the Clean Power Plan, which increase electricity prices about 20 to 30%. That has a very negative impact on consumers across this country with no benefit to show for it. And it also commits the American taxpayer to pay the lion's share of the $100 billion per year Green Climate Fund, a direct wealth transfer to the rest of the world. And so I think the reason the rest of the world likes this deal so much is that the United States cripples itself economically with regulations, and then it pays the rest of the world for the privilege of doing so in increased foreign aid. To me, that's not leadership. That's American losership, and the president is right to
let me get Michael Oppenheimer here on this. There's a lot to unpack there, but the substantive criticism that even people who favor the Paris Agreement it is a voluntary agreement. There are no real binding commitments. Why do you think it is such a great deal that we ought to stay in it?
The Paris Agreement isn't perfect, but it's an important first step, and that's why the statements of Mr. Kirpin are totally out of context. In fact, what's happening is global emissions of carbon dioxide have not increased, in fact, decreased a little over the last 3 years. For the first time, while the global economy was growing, because countries are moving to the new energy sources. It would be foolish to pull out of this agreement because, number one, it would do great harm to our relations with our allies around the world. And secondly, it would condemn the U.S., the world, and future generations, our own children, to a world with an unacceptable level of climate change. And it's a real pity.
A growing body of research shows climate change is bad, not just for the planet, but for our mental health. People who've lived through weather disasters are more prone to depression, suicide, post-traumatic stress. Psychologists see more subtle effects, too. Just thinking about the impact of a shifting climate can make you feel anxious and overwhelmed.
This group of strangers started coming together last year. They range from millennials to grandparents. Dick Meyer used to be skeptical about climate change. As the group sits in a circle in the living room, he tells why the problem made him emotional.
And I think I came to the conclusion that it was the loss of the future. The future that I had lived knowing was going to be there all of a sudden is gone. And that is really disorienting. At some point you come to a conclusion, if you're paying attention, I think, where you just say, whoa, this is serious. And then you suffer for a while. You grieve.
Laura Schmidt was also struggling when the idea for this group first came to her. She was an undergrad then, studying species extinction and melting ice caps. The human impacts of all that made her feel heartsick and powerless. Then Schmidt remembered the 12 steps that self-help groups use for problems like drugs and overdrinking.
I have been an avid participant in an Al-Anon group, Adult Children of Alcoholics, and I realized that group can be co-opted.
Schmidt wrote her own steps, 9 of them. The first is the standard, admit there's a problem.
It's a lot about understanding your power and what you're capable of, but also your limitations as a single human being on this planet.
Yes, people are anxious. We have climate anxiety all over the place.
Lisa Van Susteren is a Washington, D.C. psychiatrist and climate activist.
Every single day, we are told about what disasters are just around the corner. And this is being processed whether we know it consciously or not.
In Utah, Ellie Harbertson says she comes to these meetings to mourn the past and reimagine her kids' future.
We don't do chit-chat. We go right to, what's on your heart? And I cry every week, which is no big thing for me. I'm a huge crier, but still, feeling like I can do that with almost complete strangers is amazing.
The atmosphere is a very thin shell around the planet. We're putting 110 million tons a day of man-made heat-trapping pollution. And it's raising temperatures quite dramatically, melting all the ice, raising sea level, evaporating much more water off the oceans, causing these incredible downpours, such as the ones the UK has been experiencing in the last few years. These climate-related extreme weather events have gotten much more frequent and much more severe just since the first movie came out. And the spread of tropical diseases into higher latitudes and deeper droughts as well, political disruptions. But for all of the shocking consequences of the climate crisis, this movie is extremely hopeful because there are also pleasantly shocking developments in the field of technology where businesses have now found that just as with, computer chips came down so dramatically in price, even as the computers got faster and better, mobile phones, flat screen TVs, turns out solar panels and windmills and battery storage the same way. And now it's getting cheaper to produce electricity from renewable sources than from burning dirty coal or gas or oil. And so we have the solutions available to us.
I'm a geologist. And the one thing that we miss out on in looking at climate change is the past. Climates have always changed. Climate changes in the past have been greater and faster than anything we experience in our lifetime. And sea levels have always changed. Not by the modest couple of millimetres that people are having conniptions about, but we've had in the past sea level changes of only 1,500 metres. That's a sea level change. And if we look back in the history of time, the atmosphere once had a very large amount of carbon dioxide in it. It's now got less than 0.04%. Where did that carbon dioxide go to? It went into chalk, limestone, shells and life. And we've been sequestering carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere for only 2,000 to 500 million years. This planet has been degassing carbon dioxide since it first formed on that Thursday 4,567 million years ago. Carbon dioxide is a natural gas. It has dominated the atmosphere for an extraordinarily long period of time, and we now are at a dangerously low level. If we halved the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we would have no terrestrial plants. Carbon dioxide is plant food. It is not a pollutant. To use words like pollution with carbon dioxide is misleading and deceptive.
The United Nations says there will be 2.5 billion more people on the planet by 2050. Each will likely create more carbon emissions, and scientists say those emissions could reach a dangerous tipping point by mid-century. To avoid a disaster, one man is proposing a radical idea. As NPR's Jennifer Ludden reports, he aims to convince people to have fewer children.
Travis Reeder is not a climate scientist. He's a philosopher with the Berman Institute of Bioethics at Johns Hopkins, and his arguments are moral. When we meet, he's in a tweedy jacket and sneakers, speaking to several dozen students at James Madison University.
How old are you going to be in 2036? Are you thinking about having kids? How old are your kids going to be in 2036?
Dangerous climate change will be happening by then, he says, and the world's poorest nations will suffer most, even though rich countries like the U.S. create far more carbon emissions per capita.
So here's what's happening when I have a kid. I'm creating a being who's doing the much greater proportion of the contribution to the harm, and she's not going to suffer for it. The other kid is. And that seems unfair.
What about that big climate deal in Paris? Reeder tells students it doesn't cut emissions nearly enough to avoid a catastrophic tipping point. But this might. He cites a study that finds reducing global fertility by just half a child per woman could have a huge impact if it happens soon.
Like many people watching where I was overseas, I admit that I, like them, was shocked by the exceptionally high bar put before one candidate and the exceptionally low bar put before another candidate. It also appeared that much of the press, much of the media was tying itself in knots, trying to differentiate between balance, between objectivity, neutrality, and crucially, the truth. We cannot continue the old paradigm. We cannot, for instance, keep saying, like it was over global warming, where 99.9% of the science, the empirical facts, the evidence is given equal play with the tiny minority of deniers. I learned a long, long time ago, when I was covering the genocide and ethnic cleansing in Bosnia, never to equate victim and aggressor, never to create a false moral or factual equivalence. Because then, if you do, particularly in situations like that, you are party and accomplice to the most unspeakable crimes and consequences. So I believe in being truthful, not neutral. And I believe we must stop banalizing the truth.
For some odd reason, the major driver of climate is that great ball of heat in the sky, which we call the sun. You heard it here first. It's really quite unusual. And we change our distance from the sun. Every 100,000 years, our orbit changes from elliptical to circular. And we have a cycle of 90,000 years of cold and 10,000 years of warm. We're in one of those warm cycles now. And every 43,000 years, the axis of the Earth changes a little bit. And every 21,000 years, we get a bit of a wobble. Each of those orbital events put us further from the sun. Every now and then, we get bombarded by cosmic rays coming from a supernova eruption somewhere out there. And if the sun's magnetic field cannot drive these away, we start to form low-level clouds. We've got extremely good evidence that this process has been going on for a very long period of time. Every now and then continents start to move, and they move at very rapid rates. They move about this much every year. And at one time a continent can be over a pole, at another time it can be at the equator. Those moving continents change the major heat balance on the Earth, and that's the ocean currents. The oceans carry far more heat than the atmosphere. Every now and then, because of major geological processes, we'll get a great bulge on the ocean floor of new volcanic rock. That changes ocean currents. Every year we have 10,000 cubic kilometres of seawater that goes through new volcanic rocks in the ocean floor. That exchanges heat.
Million people in Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina are under evacuation orders to discuss how the role of climate change has been largely ignored in media coverage of Hurricane Matthew. We're joined now in our New York studio by May Boovy, Executive Director of 350 Action, the political arm of the climate organization 350.org. May, it's great to have you with us. We so often see the words extreme weather and severe weather flashing in the lower thirds of the TV screens. Where are the words climate change and global warming?
You're exactly right. And Hurricane Matthew is unfortunately just the latest example of a trend where the impacts of climate change get more serious. Politicians continue to have a break and say not nearly enough about it. We have unequivocal reason to know that these kinds of storms are made worse by climate change.
We know what they're dealing with down there. We see it time and again. Reporters such as myself have stood in those waters and watched these people rebuild. Can anything be done?
Well, for us on my side of this is a result of climate change. It's only going to get worse.
Right. We hear this all the time. But isn't there, or not just about temperature, not just about erosion and water, but the basic structure of this place, how New Orleans, from the weight of development and how it's been built up, the levees sinking. That when you're there, you stand on the ground and you look up at ships going past you in the Mississippi?
So I don't have the answer to this, except it's going to get worse. Almost certainly will get worse. Everybody, as the ocean gets warmer, which it is getting, it expands.
But think about the climate change issue. Every day, there are officials in high office with responsibilities who mock the overwhelming consensus of the world's scientists that human activities and the release of carbon dioxide and other substances are altering our climate in profound and dangerous ways. A while back, you may have seen a United States senator trotted out a snowball during a floor speech in the middle of winter as proof that the world was not warming.
And so much of what's going on now is something that we have to treat as if it's a mental illness. I believe that climate change denial is a form of mental illness.
Our website, martino'malley.com. But you know what I believe is the biggest issue that I think you should be concerned about as a young person who has more time on this planet than I do. And that is climate change. Climate change is the greatest business opportunity to come to the United States in 100 years. And I am the first candidate in either party to put forward a plan to move us to a 100% clean electric energy grid by 2050 and create 5 million jobs along the way. And this is another one of those instances, Chris, where Iowa is pointing the way forward. Look at what you have already done in your state. 30 to 35% of your energy now comes from clean Iowa wind.
When 5 oil train protesters head to trial, today those defendants, known as the Delta 5, received a blessing at Seattle's Woodland Park Presbyterian Church. The 5 were arrested back in September of 2014 for blocking the tracks at BNSF's rail yard in Everett. Members of the Delta 5 will be allowed to argue in court that their actions were necessary because of the threat of climate change.
This is a nationally significant trial, even globally significant, because it's the first time the necessity defense has been allowed and will be argued in an American court for climate civil disobedience.
During their trial, the Delta 5 defendants will call 2 rail safety experts and a climatologist to the stand to argue the threat of oil trains to communities and the climate.
We need small things, but we need big things. So the big transition away from carbon dioxide and fossil fuel is important because it has big impacts. But also on a local scale, we need to learn how the little things really play a part, how we can recycle more, what else we can do. Stop using as much plastic bottles and our bags. And one thing that always gets to me, too, is I'm the first one to join anyone for a good cup of coffee, but bring your own mug.
Right. Yeah, I've begun to do that. I want to get a couple of video questions. Here's little Layla. Take a look.
I really want the polar bears to have food to eat so they won't be hurt, and I don't know how to fix it, and I really want to.
Well, Layla, I got to tell you, you're not the only one. A lot of people are working on this issue. It is a serious one with serious impacts, but there are ways we can fix it if we all work together for this.
The big question is, are we too late? That's been the pondering question for everyone. I know we should all remain optimistic, and I want to remain optimistic.
But you were worried that we are too late, that somehow we've done so much damage we can
That's in somebody else. The answer to that is in somebody else's hands. But we do know that the scientific community has been screaming out loud for decades, and other interests have stifled their voice and manipulated this conversation. And it's a real shame. But one thing I'm proud of, that for the first time, we've seen the world community take this issue seriously. And if they hadn't, there would be absolutely no hope. We can't wait another 4 years for people to start to listen to 99% of the scientific community. I mean, it's an absurdity, and it's not about the individual anymore. It's about we. It's about we as a species, as a world community, finally coming together to make some sort of progress forward. Whether we're too late or not remains to be seen, but, I'm just very happy as an environmentalist to see something happen.
But can these alarming weather events also be blamed on climate change? Scientists say not so fast.
Maybe climate change adds a couple more warmer days or makes the warmest temperatures a little bit warmer. I don't think you can just say that because it's a warming world, we're seeing a record warm December, we might be enhancing the normal pattern that would have happened anyway by a little bit.
As freakishly warm weather sweeps the eastern U.S., a new poll shows Republicans who have largely denied climate change may be thinking again. Megan Casella has the story.
A new Reuters Ipsos poll shows that a majority of Republicans are willing to take individual steps in order to curb climate change, and many of them are also willing to support a presidential candidate who is looking to work internationally and work with other countries in order to take those same steps.
The poll found 58% of Republicans who knew of the recent global climate deal reached in Paris approved of efforts to limit global warming.
It's a snowball.
For years, Republican politicians like Oklahoma Senator James Inhofe have made climate change denial a key contrast with President Obama and the Democrats.
Mr. President, catch this.
2016 GOP hopefuls like Donald Trump singing a similar tune.
President Obama said that global warming is our biggest problem. Can you believe this?
We're seeing a primary where many of these candidates aren't talking about the issues at all. Many of the Republican candidates are going so far as to disavow the science behind climate change and say that they don't even believe that it is primarily man-made. And so we're seeing a difference there between what the Republican electorate is thinking and hoping to see and what the candidates themselves are saying.
And that could turn up the heat if a Republican takes the White House next year and has to decide whether to implement the climate agreement or scrap it.
Global climate talks in Paris have entered their 9th day. Delegates are working to reach a deal to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. Several of Wednesday's events are focusing on the climate impacts of meat and dairy consumption. Singer Paul McCartney has been highlighting the importance of a meat-reduced diet. He says the livestock industry is responsible for a massive percentage of greenhouse gases. German MEP Jo Leinen says diet is one of the most delicate issues with climate protection. Activists in Paris are taking a gentle approach to the world's love affair with meat, ranging from offering look-alike plant burgers to suggesting a gradual weaning off animal protein. For now, meat consumption is rising in many countries despite warnings. Most recently, a World Health Organization report found eating processed or red meat increased the risk of developing cancer. Delegates hope to secure a final climate deal by a deadline of 6 p.m. Central European Time on Friday.
We're now all in this point in time on this planet, and if we don't work together, the consequences are disastrous. Not right now, but for our children and our children's children and the future of humanity, the planet will be okay. There just won't be any damn people on it.
And so we are actively at the table, even though it's such a short period of time, but it's a commitment of our Prime Minister, it's a commitment of mine to be here, to listen, to look at how we can play a role in finding solutions. We're not there yet with having an agreement, but we're getting close, and I think there's real opportunities. And if Canada actually shows that it's serious, that it's back, that we understand that the science behind climate change is real, that we need to be taking action, that we need to be, looking at what measures we can take to reduce emissions, I think that will send an extraordinarily strong signal. And we've already seen that, that people are excited that we're here, and Canadians are excited that we're here. I'm excited to be here, so I'm really looking forward, to meeting with everyone and showing that we are serious and that Canada is back on the world stage.
He couldn't answer the most basic fact that for the last 18 years the satellite data showed no significant warming whatsoever. Correct. He had no idea about that. He turned to his aides every minute or two. And part of the reason he didn't know the facts? Because climate change is not science. It's religion. Look at the language where they call you a denier. Denier is not the language of science. Look, I'm the child of two scientists. My parents are both mathematicians, computer programmers. My dad was a self-taught geophysicist. The essence of the scientific method is to start with a hypothesis and then look to evidence to disprove the hypothesis. You're not trying to prove it. You're trying to disprove it. Any good scientist is a skeptic. If he's not, he or she should not be a scientist. But yet the language of the global warming alarmists, denier, is the language of religion. It's heretic. You are a blasphemer. The response from the Sierra Club, we have decreed this is the answer. You must accept it. And so he didn't know his facts because he just knew his religion.
For now, on air, scepticism over climate change has cost one French weatherman his job. He was taken off air after publishing a book where he described, quote, the complete hype on the matter.
Je m'appelle Philippe Verdier, je suis journaliste, présentateur météo à la télévision.
Well, Philippe Verdier's book questioned the causes and consequences of climate change. The author suggested that warmer temperatures could bring benefits, including cheaper energy bills. His comments came just as France prepares to host a major UN conference on climate change later this month that aims to decrease pollution levels. We asked the head of the publishing house what he thinks about the incident.
For me, this incident felt like a crime of opinion, pure and simple. With this book, we expected a controversy, but not a sacking. This demonstrates that there is a real ideological problem in France. At a certain point, we asked Philip about the possible outcomes. We told him that he should protect his interests. Never did he say it's the money that counts.
There are so many different things that can dampen your sex drive. You're tired, you have a headache, the kids are bugging you. And now here's another one to add to the list. Global warming. That's right, climate change can kill your mojo. So researchers looked at really hot days and then looked forward 9 months. And what they found is fewer babies were born 9 months after those hot days. They defined really hot days as being over 80 degrees. Those hot days made couples feel, well, maybe not so hot. The impact was pretty sizable. In the United States, they found that the impact of one hot day meant 1,100 fewer births 9 months later. When you look at the whole United States, we have about 30 days a year where the temperature climbs above 80. However, as global warming takes its toll, it's predicted that we could have 90 days a year where the temperature climbs that high. That could mean eventually in the United States, 100,000 fewer births every year. And because of global warming, it's just getting hotter. Now, once the weather cooled off, couples did get back to coupling, but still it didn't make up for the decreases during the hot months. So it turns out global warming is not just bad for our oceans and our crops, it's also bad for our sex lives.
Peer pressure and cooperation. These are just some of the buzzwords being used ahead of the UN climate meeting in Paris this December, where talks will look to reach an international agreement to cut greenhouse gas emissions. Negotiators planning to enforce any deals without sanctions or punishments.
The climate agreement will be more along the lines of a nuclear agreement than it will be along the lines of something, let's say, under the World Trade Organization, where you could come out and slap trade sanctions on people. Of course, some people say this just isn't good enough. The Bolivians especially have the most radical proposal, which is to say that you should have an international climate justice tribunal. Neither China nor the United States, the two top emitters of greenhouse gases, would be willing to submit themselves to a strong legal review of their promises to curb greenhouse gas emissions.
Instead, a likely outcome could be a pledge and review system, whereby commitments are assessed every 5 years against the goal of halving world emissions by 2050. Advocates of that also anticipate an organic move towards green energy.
The hope is that in coming years that the prices of solar technology or wind technology, wind turbines, hydropower will have come down so much that it makes economic sense for governments to go ahead and do this.
Since 1979, the summer sea ice in the Arctic has decreased by more than 40%, a decrease that has dramatically accelerated over the past 2 decades. One new study estimates that Alaska's glaciers alone lose about 75 gigatons. That's 75 billion tons of ice each year. To put that in perspective, one scientist described a gigaton of ice as a block the size of the National Mall in Washington, from Congress all the way to the Lincoln Memorial, 4 times as tall as the Washington Monument. Now imagine 75 of those ice blocks. That's what Alaska's glaciers alone lose each year. The pace of melting is only getting faster. It's now twice what it was between 1950 and 2000. Twice as fast as it was just a little over a decade ago. And it's one of the reasons why sea levels rose by about 8 inches over the last century, and why are they projected to rise another 1 to 4 feet this century.
Because I don't think you think climate change is a real problem. And I'm not alone.
I mean, the most recent survey...
You're not alone.
The most recent survey of climate scientists said about 57% don't agree with the idea that 95% of the change in the climate is being caused by CO2. Again? There was a survey done of 1,800 scientists, and 57% said they don't buy off on the idea that CO2 is the knob that's turning the climate. There's hundreds of reasons for climate change.
I don't know what ass you're pulling that
I'm not. I'll send you the survey.
Okay.
It's 1,800 climate scientists, and that's number one. Number two, the 97% figure that's thrown around, the head of the UN IPC said that number was pulled out of thin air. It was based on a survey of 77, not even 97 scientists responded to that survey. So let's talk about facts. And the fact is, lots of things cause climate change.
The Pope made a very strong statement in support of my position on climate change, not yours. And your position, when you heard that, was, hey, let's leave the science to the scientists. Okay, first of all, you're not doing that. But second of all,
I am.
You're not, because 97% of all scientists believe...
It's a bogus number.
It's so not a bogus number.
It's so a bogus number.
Okay, yours is, mine is, yours is, mine is. But what I want to ask you is, I mean, I'm not a Catholic. I'm an atheist. But I like the Pope better than you do, and I wouldn't. But wait a second. You're saying the Pope should stick to what he knows, and I find that so ridiculous. Because this is what I always say: so much of religion is arrogance masquerading as humility. He's the vicar of Christ, your God. Shouldn't you have the humility to say, "Well, if the Pope thinks climate change is a problem, maybe I should"? He's not just another guy.
If you look at all the things the Pope said, which I hope you do, he put it in the context of trying to reach out to people who may not agree with him on a whole lot of other issues in order to try to open up some doors and open up a conversation, which he's obviously done. I mean, Al Gore's now saying he's going to become a Catholic because of this president. I mean, because of this Pope.
Contrary to media headlines, the trend over the past couple of decades has been essentially flat. Meanwhile, human-caused CO2 emissions are higher than ever. About 25% of all the CO2 emissions from human sources have occurred during this period of no net warming. So what are we in for next? Will the temperature resume an upward trend? Will it remain flat for a lengthy period? Or will it begin to drop? No one knows. Not even the biggest, fastest computers. All the information I've presented, the increases, decreases, and plateaus in temperature over the ages and into the last centuries, is available to anyone who wants to seek it out. Yet to state these simple facts is to risk being called a climate change denier. Not only is that absurd, it's mean-spirited. It's absurd because no one, not even the most fervent skeptic, denies that the climate is changing. And it's mean-spirited because to call someone a climate change denier is to intentionally link them to people who deny the Holocaust. So maybe it's time to stop the name-calling. Predicting the climate, one of the most complex systems on Earth, with thousands of inputs, many of which we don't understand, isn't an exact science or anything close to it. Maybe it's just a tad arrogant to suggest that we can predict the weather or the climate or just about anything 60 years from now. The science is not settled. The debate is not over. The climate is always changing, it always has, and it always will. I'm Patrick Moore, co-founder of Greenpeace for Prager University.
Climate change is stretching out our variability.
Talk about politics. It's always been very important to you, making a difference in the world. Where do you think things stand in 2014? A lot of people are cynical.
I think that the powers that be that run this world have us exactly where they want us.
Yeah.
They want everyone to just lie down, shut up while we rob you.
Talk about the fight for a cleaner, safer environment.
Well, there are many problems facing us, especially with the acidification of the ocean and the rising of the temperatures and the melting of the glaciers. But it all really stems from climate change.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, it's appalling how many climate change deniers there are in this world that are paid to make sure that the Koch brothers can still sell all the stuff to us. And I often wonder, don't the Koch brothers have children? Don't they have grandchildren? Don't they know what they're doing in this quest for more money? They're already one of the richest families in the world. How much more do you need?
We have a brand new aspect of Hollywood Health and Society, which is to work with on the topic of climate change, where, again, all these different activities, writer briefings, screenings, newsletters, and so on, are an attempt to provide free resources to writers who want to include climate change as one of the storylines that they're working on. And just to give you an example of that climate change work, a few weeks ago, there was a field trip. We do something called story bus tours to the JPL NASA lab in Pasadena, where we brought something like 37 writers and producers to experience the most amazing stuff that they have going on to inspire them in this area and to be factually accurate.
If you noticed your last flight was unusually bumpy, get used to it. Scientists say climate change is making the air more turbulent. Case in point, the South African Airlines flight. Rough air sent passengers flying across the cabin. Some even hit the ceiling. 20 people were seriously injured on that flight from Johannesburg to South Africa. CNN's George Howe has more for you.
Been on a flight like this lately? A recent study may have you reaching for the seatbelts, suggesting we could see more turbulence in the years to come as a result of climate change. And after the ups and downs I experienced on this flight, I decided to look into it. Okay, so we're flying from Austin to Chicago, and it's one of the bumpiest flights I've been on ever. What do you think?
My stomach actually physically hurts from the flight being so choppy.
We'll never be able to say that one particular person's flight experience, which was bumpy, has been caused by climate change. Of course we can't. But what we can say is that as the climate changes, the odds of encountering turbulence on your flight are increasing.
Dr. Paul Williams says climate change is not only heating up the bottom part of the atmosphere, but that computer models show increased carbon dioxide levels are also changing the temperatures and wind speeds in the jet stream. His research focuses in on transatlantic flights, specifically addressing what's called clear air turbulence, occurring high above the clouds. And passengers are starting to feel the difference.
Those jet stream wind shears are becoming stronger because of climate change, and that, I believe, is causing the atmosphere to become more turbulent, and that is causing airplane flights to become bumpier as a consequence.
Thank you very much. So, Dr. Botkin, you'd be one of the 97% that's talked about, and certainly, you feel like man is contributing and this and that, but certainly are not one that feels like the models are acceptable. And I suspect that you have many of your cohorts that are in the same camp.
Well, I think the key thing here is that science is not a rule by majority method. That's the important thing. It's discovery. And I'd like to quote Jonas Salk, the inventor of the polio vaccine. He said, I get into a dialogue with nature and put the question to nature, not to my colleagues, because that's from whence the answer must come. And that's what I do. I always look at the data. And also Richard Feynman, one of the great 20th century quantum physicists, said, science is the belief in the ignorance of experts. So to keep saying it's a majority, that's not a scientific statement, and it's not correct. I've spent 50 years working on climate change in a very constructive way, and what I can tell you is that since about 1990, the data has started to move in the other direction, away from an important effect by human beings, and that's just what the facts show.
Hey everybody, I'm Gina McCarthy, Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. Let me start by thanking Reverend Yearwood and the Hip Hop Caucus for putting all of this together. I also want to give a shout out to Reverend Durley and everyone else at the Hip Hop Caucus's climate tour. At EPA, it's our job to protect public health and the environment. Too often, low-income neighborhoods and communities of color are overburdened by air pollution, water pollution, and contaminated soil, as well as dangerous floods, fires, and storms that have been worsened by climate change. In the U.S., an African-American child is 5 times more likely than a white child to die from an asthma attack. And climate change means hotter temperatures and even more air pollution, which especially burdens minority communities. It's tough to go to school or to find a job when you're sick or caring for a child who is sick. Pollution is holding back millions of African Americans fighting for middle-class security, because the first few rungs of any ladder of opportunity are clean air to breathe and clean water to drink. And President Obama calls closing those gaps of opportunity the defining issue of our time.
Fantastic news today for freedom of speech. As I've said here several times, Professor Peter Ridd is a Great Barrier Reef expert who was sacked shamefully by James Cook University for questioning claims by colleagues that the reef was being destroyed by global warming. He was sacked for saying things like this.
We can no longer trust the scientific organisations like the Australian Institute of Marine Science, even things like the ARC Centre of Excellence for Coral Reef Studies. A lot of this stuff is coming out, which the science is coming out not properly checked, tested or replicated. And this is a great shame, because we really need to be able to trust our scientific institutions.
Well, the federal court today ruled that Ridd's sacking was unlawful. Joining me is Gideon Rosner, Policy Director of the Institute of Public Affairs, which has supported Rudd's fight for free speech. Gideon, thank you so much for joining me. What did the judge find exactly?
Well, the judge found essentially that every action the university took against Peter, whether it be the censures, whether it be the gag orders, and whether it be, in fact, his final sacking, were all invalid. They were all measures that shouldn't have happened because they overrode and contravened Peter's right to free speech and free intellectual expression that's contained in his EBA. So all of what Peter suffered from talking out against the climate change orthodoxy, everything that he was hit by for speaking against the so-called settled science that the reef was in danger, was all found to be invalid because he was protected for free expression.
Is the Great Barrier Reef dying?
No, look, the reef is in fantastic shape. I often say that of all the ecosystems in the world, possibly with the exception of Antarctica, the Great Barrier Reef is one of the best preserved there is.
So, Peter, what would you say to the naysayers and the usual suspects who would paint you as somebody who doesn't care about the environment?
Well, I come from an environmentalist family. Right from a very early age, I've been in environmental organisations. I used to be the president of the local branch of the Wildlife Preservation Society. I'm an environmentalist.
In 1977, the worst winter in a century struck the United States. Arctic cold gripped the Midwest for weeks on end. Great blizzards paralyzed cities of the Northeast. One desperate night in Buffalo, 8 people froze to death in marooned cars. Pat Bushnell was on the road that night.
Traffic just absolutely stopped. I was afraid of being stuck in the car all night long with the cold and the wind, running out of gas. And then what? I think that if we had to go through a real bad winter, just like we just went through, I think we'd have to think about moving someplace else.
Move where? The brutal Buffalo winter might become common all over the United States. Climate experts believe the next ice age is on its way. According to recent evidence, it could come sooner than anyone had expected. At weather stations in the far north, temperatures have been dropping for 30 years. Seacoasts, long free of summer ice, are now blocked year-round. According to some climatologists, within a lifetime, we might be living in the next ice age.
Wow, John, you've outdone yourself.
But thanks. It's all because of the database, it turns out. Who knew?
Well, that's my Tourette's, as you say.
Yes.
Finally paying off.
Well organized.
It's paying off. Well, I'm missing a lot, unfortunately. We just didn't have anymore. But it sounds like you had some stuff going way back before my database, I think. It must be yours.
I don't know.
It's a database.
Just ran them out. We just ran with them. And the ones, there were boring ones that were left on the cutting room floor, but most of these kept people listening, I'm sure.
All right, everybody. Well, on the next show, we'll be back. We'll tell you what we're doing on that one. I think you'll enjoy that as well. In the meantime, remember, we've got episode 1337 coming up. That's the lead. It'll be celebrated on 1338 and coming to you from a vacation destination in the morning, everybody. I'm Adam Curry.
And from northern Silicon Valley, where I remain, I'm John C. Dvorak.
We'll see you on the next show on Sunday. Until then, adios, mofos, and such.
Dvorak.org/NA